Welcome to the Florida chapter of American Academy of Pediatric Trainee Tips, an educational series for pediatric trainees offering advice on topics of interest identified by medical student, resident, and fellow members of the Florida chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I am your host, Isa Hanna, a third-year pediatric resident of University of Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, and a member of the Florida chapter of AAP Resident and Trainees Committee. In this session of the Florida Chapter AAP Trainees Tips, financial advisors Mr. Matthew Davis and Mr. Bryson of the Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management Company will explain fundamentals way to envision the most efficient and fruitful financial life. Some of these concepts can be applied to your goals and vision for your career to best aid your thinking. Please note that financial planning should be addressed on case-by-case basis with a professional to make sure these principles fit into your specific circumstances. Matthew Davis is a financial advisor practicing since 2012. He's a University of Florida alumni and Army veteran that's passionate about financial literacy for physicians and tailoring specific plans for their households and practices. He recently married his wife, an OBGYN, in his front yard due to COVID restrictions. Hobbies include visiting national parks, playing with his dog, and staying in his wife's good graces. Bryson is a certified financial planner and fiduciary who specializes in comprehensive planning and tax strategy for physicians and businesses owners. He has been an advisor for the past 10 years and has clients in over 30 states. His team of 6 coordinators coordinates the moving pieces of clients' lives into one cohesive plan and recommendations. Bryson and his wife, Krista, has 2 children, Isaiah and Elizabeth, whom they love to take exploring trails in town, reading books, spending time with the church community, and traveling in the non-COVID era. Lesser known facts about Bryson would be his passions for botany, ultimate frisbee, and a minor in Arabic from college. Now I will turn it over to Matthew and Bryson.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Hanna. I'm Matthew Davis here with Bryson Bard. Today we're going to talk about student loan planning, as Dr. Hanna mentioned. First of all, we want to point out that student loan planning is a piece of the pie, so go over to our financial planning talk to hear how this fits into investment, insurance, and savings planning as well. I'm going to spout off some questions that we hear from a lot of our resident clients and the residents that we meet with on a consistent basis. So Bryson, which payment option should I choose? What's the best payment option for my student loans?
Well, Matt, that's a great question. That's probably one of the first questions we get from PGY1s. So interns considering that, and they got to usually make that decision by October to December of their first year. But there are 4 main decisions when you're looking at payment types. You have the standard payment. If you don't choose anything, that's the default, where you'll probably get a bill in the mail for $2,000 a month and freak out a little bit. Or you can choose an income-driven plan, which key point that most people don't realize is an income-driven plan is an overall category. One of the subcategories is called income-based repayment. That often gets confused together. Others are pay-as-you-earn, revised pay-as-you-earn, income contingent. So again, standard repayment, income-driven plan. You can do forbearance or you could refinance your loans. So those are the first questions. As far as which one's going to be best for you, there are quite a few factors. However, if we can make any payment at all, and even your first year, you can actually have a $0 payment with a lot of the income-driven plans, because the previous tax year you didn't have an income. Many clients choose revised pay-as-you-earn for the interest subsidy. That's something people may not be familiar with, but any unpaid interest under revised pay-as-you-earn is subsidized 50%, meaning that if your payment's $200 a month, that's $2,400 for the year, and your interest, if your interest for the year was $12,400, there would be $10,000 of unpaid interest. Well, instead of that entire $10,000 capitalizing in your loan, $5,000 would be subsidized, and only $5,000 would capitalize. One downside to revised pay-as-you-earn is that it will always include a spouse's income, even if you file taxes together separately. So whereas there are other plans that you could separate that. So let's just say you're a resident, but your spouse is an attending surgeon. Well, that might not be the best plan for you, depending on if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, or you're just seeking to have the lowest payment. So especially spouses that don't share income, if one spouse is theirs and the other spouse is the other's, you could not afford that payment as a resident. So there's a lot of factors. Actually, an interesting fact is student loans is one of the most complex of all the IRS plans, as far as how it's taxed and how payments are decided, because your payments are dependent on how much you earned last year. Do you work for a for-profit or a non-profit entity? What does your spouse make? Do they have student loans? All these are factors that go into what would your payment be. We walk with people individually, consulting them in each one of those decisions. And again, we believe it's a part of a much broader concept. So student loans are part of it, but savings, investing, insurances are also part of important planning.
So could you hammer down a little more on the difference between income-based and income-driven? These sound the same. What are the differences?
Yeah. So income-driven is the umbrella term for all of the payment options that are dependent on your income. So one other interesting fact about this is an income-driven plan, your payment is based solely on your income. Has nothing to do with your loan balance. So you could have $50,000 of loans or $500,000 of loans, and your payment is the exact same if you make $100,000. And so it's very interesting. But again, an income-based plan, an income-based repayment plan is one of the options of income-driven. And for example, revised pay-as-you-earn is also one of the options of income-driven. So driven's the umbrella term, and then there are these subcategories. So, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, the income-driven plans, almost all of them, you're going to pay 10% of your income above what's called it's your discretionary income, and they normally define that by income over the poverty line, which I believe is around $14,000 or so. I don't remember that's for a household or a single individual, but it's how much income you make over poverty line is how they define discretionary income.
Okay. So another question I think we both hear quite often is I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing after residency. I want to do public loan student forgiveness, but I'm not sure. Should I even try? What's going on here with the public loan forgiveness program?
Yeah, so we hear that situation a lot. So an intern or a PGY2 is not sure they're going to do PSLF. They say, I don't know what job I'm going to get after residency. Should I just go ahead and refinance now? That's ultimately what they're kind of trying to decide, usually. But the good news is that we would actually probably give a pretty similar recommendation in many cases of what someone should do during residency, regardless of whether they go into a nonprofit setting after residency. because during residency, with your income being so low, an income-driven plan can be very efficient, especially if you're getting the interest, the 50% interest subsidy on repay. Because if your interest rate's at 6.8% and you have 50% interest subsidy, but you've paid a little bit, so let's say your net interest rate's 3.5 or 4%. That's pretty comparable to what you get in a private loan anyway, but you're getting points towards your public service loan forgiveness time. So in the 10-year, the 120 months that you need to fulfill, those count. You say, well, what if I don't go into it? Well, that's okay. We're paying the same amount of interest along the way anyway. So that's good. Also, if along the way you happen to pass away, having a federal loan doesn't leave any debt to a survivor. If you happen to become disabled, then you no longer could be a physician, and then you, let's say you teach at a med school. Well, in an academic setting, you probably would qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So keeping that option available is very advantageous. And so the other aspect of this, let's say we had extra money, say, well, if I have extra money, should I pay down further on my loan? If you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, the goal is to pay as little as possible. Actually, if we pay extra, we get less of that subsidy, because the more we pay, the less the less interest, unpaid interest we have left over. So there's a lower subsidy. Right. So for every dollar we pay extra, we only save 50 cents. And so another concept that we've employed with a lot of our clients is something called a loan backup account. It's not a special account necessarily. It's a savings or investment account that they might put extra money into. And if they had an extra $1,000 a month they wanted to put towards their loans just in case, instead of paying down on the loan, that if it gets forgiven, that $1,000 a month really didn't make a difference one way or the other. They might put that towards a savings account or an investment account on the side. That if they go through the process and if loan forgiveness does happen, they have that extra money on the side that goes towards their dream house, towards retirement, towards whatever it is that they need. But if at any point down the road they change careers to where they're no longer going to be public service, legislatively things change to where public service loan forgiveness goes away, or they just don't want to do it anymore, they can pull the money out of that account, the investment or savings account, to pay off the balance of the loan based off what's in there. So again, our goal is that our clients have a plan B, even if they pursue PSLF, that there's a plan B that is just as efficient had they started paying it down aggressively day one.
Okay, yeah, let's talk more about this loan backup account. So sounds pretty interesting, especially if I were in a repay where my interest is subsidized too on top of that.
Yeah. So for our clients, we might set up an investment account. Now, this is not a retirement account because we need to pull it out before 59 in the event we need it. So we'll start up an investment account, and there's different types we could look at. If you're married, there's ones that are better for asset protection, which is an important topic. But we would save money into it. And let's just say we had that extra $1,000 a month. If we put it into that account, and let's just say that we could get 7%. We don't guarantee that, but let's just use that as an average rate of return. If your student loan interest is at 6.8, let's just say you're not even getting subsidized interest. You're paying the full 6.8%. Well, if those were both happening, you were accumulating 6.8% loan interest, and you were earning 7% on your investment account, your loan backup account. Well, then at any point along the way, you would be just in the exact same situation by selling those investments and paying off the debt than had you started right away. Because essentially the interest is offsetting each other. And so it provides our clients with a lot of flexibility that, again, if loans get forgiven, then they get an extra $200,000 or $300,000 in their pocket towards their financial goals. However, if they don't get forgiven, they're not caught off guard. They have the assets there they can pull out and pay $200,000 or $300,000 lump sum to get those loans paid off.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really good info. Here's another good question. Let's say I'm a resident or I'm a medical student in my last year, and I'm positive I'm going to go work at a non-for-profit institution. So I'm definitely going to pursue that public student loan forgiveness. How do I ensure I pay the least amount? What things can I do to ensure that my payments are as low as possible the entire time? And especially if I'm considering doing this loan backup account the entire time I'm in residency and fellowship.
Yeah, so we get this question a lot. It could be that they're pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Other people just want to pay less, maybe because they have a spouse or kids and no one else is working in their family. And $55,000 doesn't go very far in that case. So they just want to pay as minimum as possible just because. So no matter what, there are some strategies of reducing your student loan payment. One is we can often use the previous year's tax return to get the lowest, to get last year's income. This is important because in residency, our income goes up over time, and it actually goes up mid-year, which actually creates another opportunity. So a PGY1 that uses the previous year's tax return when they were a fourth-year med student, it kind of $0 as first income. And then by PGY2, their first year, the first calendar year, they only had 6 months of income. And so their payment might only be $100 or even slightly less during PGY2. By PGY3 or longer, if you're other specialties, you're generally going to pay a full payment, which might be closer to $300 a month or so, assuming you don't have another spouse. So that's the first thing. And by the way, this is a key point with 2020 because of COVID. Most of you probably know that there was no interest during this period. But one thing they just announced, it sounds like they're pushing back when you need to verify your income an additional till next December, basically December 2021. So you should verify that that's still accurate. I mean, things are changing daily as of this time. But if that's the case, then if someone's a PGY2, they could still use the previous year's payments, which could be advantageous. If they're a first year attending or second year attending, they can keep that lower payment for a little bit longer time. And especially when you're on an income-driven plan, the goal is to pay as little as possible, because the less we pay and still satisfy that 10-year requirement, the more forgiveness, then we're maximizing the loan forgiveness strategy. And to Matt's point about if we're on repay where there's an interest subsidy, we also want to pay less, again, because if we pay additional on our loans, every dollar we pay, we're only saving 50 cents. So it would make more sense over 5 years, or let's say 3 years for pediatrics, to put that into even a savings account. Because let's just say that we had that, we gave the example before of that $10,000 of unpaid interest, $5,000 was subsidized. If a resident paid $10,000 towards their loans and they pay all their interest so that their loans stay flat, they get zero subsidy because they paid it all. They paid all the interest. So imagine this. Imagine they still just paid the $200 a month. So in the example we're giving is there's $12,400 of total interest. You paid $200 a month, your minimum. If you just pay the minimum, $5,000 gets subsidized, $5,000 capitalized on the loan. But what if we had 10 grand extra? We could pay it all off. If we put that 10 grand into a savings account for 3 years, we have $30,000, right? But our interest has only accumulated by 15 because we had $5,000 of subsidy each year for 3 years. That at the end of 3 years, you have an extra $15,000 in your pocket. That at that point, you could take the $30,000 in your savings account. Let's not even say we invested, and you put it towards your loan. Well, then our loan balance didn't stay flat. We're actually paid off all the interest of $15,000 because the subsidies, say thank you, and then we paid off an additional $15,000 of principal at the end of 3 years. So significant opportunities. That $15,000 may not be life changing, but it's certainly helpful, and it's a significant amount for especially as a resident.
That's some really smart advice. Thanks. So let's get to the more gossipy kind of parts about student loans. During the Trump administration, there was a lot of talk that maybe public loan forgiveness would go away, but with the new Biden administration coming in, what are those rumors? What's the beat on the streets? in regards to the new Biden administration.
Right. So at the time of this recording, Biden's not even in office yet. So these things are changing daily. At this point, there's just suggestions, and then Biden has ideas. They still got to go through a lot of other people's opinions too. So all that to say is it'll probably be outdated by the time you hear this, but we'll share some ideas of things that we're hearing. One of the first things is that the idea of full loan forgiveness, that everything's going to be forgiven from people with unlimited amounts of money, limited amounts of loan paid off for everybody. That's not really been a legitimate consideration that's been tossed around very much. There's probably four. I was just looking at the most recent data before this presentation just to make sure I was up to date as well. One of the first ones was immediate forgiveness has been thrown out. Immediate forgiveness about $10,000, just of those who had student loans. And again, even that's had different factors of whether those are people that are working for nonprofits or just anybody. And these are all specific, by the way, to federal student loans. None of these would affect private student loans. The second one has been those who are doing public service, like let's say you're applying for public service loan forgiveness, or would likely qualify for those who are in residency at a nonprofit hospital that would qualify for PSLF in general, is $10,000 a year of forgiveness for each year. So that would be beneficial, and it would definitely be a reason why you'd want to stay on public, basically keep your loans federal during residency if they're going to forgive $10,000 each year, and that's up to 5 years. They've mentioned up to $50,000. The last two have to do with the income-driven plans. They're making some adjustments to that. Remember before that we mentioned discretionary income was anything over the poverty line. They've talked about
Right.
raising discretionary income to anything over $25,000. So that's important because that means that your first $25,000 of income don't count. It's just that's over top of that. So PGY 1 probably wouldn't even be anything. And then even for PGY, 2, 3, there's probably only 25,000 of income. Above that, maybe 30. The second thing they
So even if I'm making $0 payments, those would qualify as qualifying payments.
Right. Exactly. Well, so
yeah,
if you do forbearance, those don't count. But if you are making a qualified payment of $0, that counts as a year's fulfillment of PSLF. And so PGY 1, and with this new,
gotta love that.
With this new, if they raise it to 25,000, then likely your payment during PGY 2 could be a $0 payment that counts as well. And again, also having the likely the interest subsidy, I'm guessing, and the $10,000 of payoff. We'd have to see exactly how that works. The final thing they've talked about is instead of 10% of income over discretionary income, that would lower to 5% of income. So it just would be a much lower payment along the way, making, that time from, attending to loan payoff much more bearable. This also affects people who aren't going to do public service loan forgiveness. We didn't talk about this much, but within revised pay-as-you-earn and income-based repayment, there are built-in forgivenesses just if you're on that plan at all. So it doesn't matter whether this is not public service. This is even if you work for private practice, et cetera. Those generally take 20 or 25 years to fulfill. Now, where this becomes important is if they change it to only 5% of income, well, that's a much more palatable 20 years because you have a much lower payment along the way. The other thing that this, as a rule of thumb prior, so at 10% of income, let's say nothing changes, just I didn't mention this before, so I'll mention it now. The loan forgiveness that's not public service loan forgiveness is built into these income-driven plans can still be potentially valuable if your income is lower than your loan balance. So let's just say you went to a private school, you have a higher student loan balance of, let's just say $400,000. We've seen that, definitely before. And your income might only be $200,000. Well, that's a significant variance that your minimum payment would be well below. You wouldn't pay all your interest. It'd actually keep accumulating. At the end of 20 years, then that loan balance would be forgiven. Now, one key difference between public service loan forgiveness and the repayment plan that's built into the income-based plans or income-driven plans is that an income-driven plan that gets forgiven, we have to pay tax on it. And so the public service loan forgiveness gets forgiven and there's no tax code. Huge difference between those, because tax on $400,000 is going to, itself be $130,000 of tax. So there are some things there. We would encourage you to work with a professional on the planning side to help you plan that out and what's going to be best for you.
Yeah, so thank you for all that information. It's a lot of information. Where would I even want to start when I'm trying to implement some of these ideas?
Right. So as far as our clients that are seeking to get started in financial planning, student loan strategy, I guess, first of all, this is a student loan conversation, but we think it's a part of a much broader conversation that your savings, your investments, your insurance, and your student loans are all interconnected. And so we would recommend you do a comprehensive plan that projects your future cash flow, current cash flow, your needs now, with a fiduciary advisor, a certified financial planner. So to really get an idea of what's the best place to allocate money currently, we do complimentary consultations. We'd be happy to talk with you. Also, I would say work with someone who specializes with physicians. There's a lot of financial planners who are very smart, but frankly, very few have much at all. There's little need to know a lot about student loans and public service loan forgiveness if you're not working a lot with those clients. And so whereas Matt and myself see these 3 times a day, 4 times a day, another advisor might see it 3 times a year. So we would say work with a specialist. So in finance, you guys have spent a lot of time getting your education, your specialty and working with children. There's a specialty in how do you, pay down debt as efficiently as possible and accumulate wealth efficiently as well.
Well, thanks, Bryson. A lot of great information. Thank you. At this point, we'd like to thank Dr. Hannah, and thank you all for listening to this episode of FCAAP Trainee Tips. I'm Matt Davis, and that was Bryson Bard, and we appreciate your time.